My name is Jim Ryan, and I'm the new instructional designer here at EWU. My job here is to take a look at the programs, courses, and people from a different point of view, to see how all these Lego pieces fit, and to imagine how I can help put them together differently to make something new and amazing. Welcome to the Play to Learn podcast. Today, I'm talking with my good friend Nigel Pingree again. In this episode, we discuss literary and storytelling strategies designed to grab the attention of the audience by either following the rules perfectly or breaking them perfectly. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy. So hi, Nigel. We were originally meeting to talk about, and at some point we should probably continue it, our work on the summer bridge program, but we sparked up a conversation that I felt just really needed to be explored in more depth and in more detail. And it really comes down to storytelling and bringing storytelling into the classroom, and also, what was it we were talking about? Something to do with how to be more effective storytellers, essentially, by being able to use a number of different storytelling tools to really increase the engagement of the listener.
So to give kind of here's the backstory, more or less. I was telling James about how I had started listening to Andy Serkis's reading of Lord of the Rings, because my bedtime routine consists more or less of listening to an audiobook as sort of a wind down activity. And I'd recently finished listening to one book and figured I didn't have anything lined up. So I got, I read The Fellowship when I was in high school a long time ago. And so, a couple of things struck me. So the reason that this came up was because we were discussing how English majors can become jaded to certain storytelling tactics, certain tropes and things. The more you learn about a topic, the more it kind of gets spoiled for you sometimes. It's sort of like learning a magician's tricks. That's really one of the best ways to describe it, is when you are in the audience watching a magic show, you're watching magic. But if you learn how the trick works, and if you are the magician watching another magician work, you're not watching magic, you're watching sleight of hand. You're watching psychology. You're watching science. You're watching a liar. You're not watching magic anymore. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and so when you're a storyteller yourself, the better you are, the more you know about the tricks of the trade, the more you're keyed into the chinks in the armor, you know? And so I was listening to The Fellowship of the Ring, and the first conversation in the entire story, like the first bit of dialogue, is expository dialogue. It's a group of old hobbits sitting around and gossiping about Bilbo Baggins and Frodo Baggins, and he's got all these tunnels full of gold and treasure. So then the conversation goes into them sort of telling Frodo's family history, and Bilbo went off on his adventure, and they're really just giving the reader information the reader needs. And if you've been through school for storytelling, essentially through creative writing classes and things like that, you may recognize this as expository dialogue, or as they would call it in the Turkey City lexicon, they would say that this is "as you know, Bob" dialogue. And this is really, that's making fun of like TV writing, where you would have a couple of detectives in a room or walking through a hallway, and it'd be at the beginning of the episode, and it's like, well, what's the killer? What's the rundown on the killer? And then the detective would say to the other head detective, "Well, as you know, Bob," and then they would describe everything that they already know. And it's like, well, why would you? But would people really say this because they already know it? No. And so there's an interesting thing that Tolkien does. Two or three interesting things. One of them is at the very beginning, he lampshades this, and lampshading is kind of like saying, yes, I know this is against the rules. Yes, I know this is bad, but we're going to really lean into it here. And so what he does is he has one of these old hobbits launch into the story, and he calls attention to the fact that everyone at the table is well familiar with the Baggins family history, but hobbits are very passionate about family history, and they're ready to hear it again. And so he lampshades this whole thing, which the thing about tropes is the first time you do it, it's not a trope or a cliche, and so this was long enough ago that these things hadn't been beaten to death by the commercialization of the literary industry, right? There was plenty of writing, there were plenty of books, but like there were not rotisseries of books in the grocery aisles. They weren't quite the dime a dozen thing that they are now in terms of you've read one, you've read them all. Like it isn't like that. All of the tropey fantasy novels that you've read, all of their cliches are only cliche because they're copying what Tolkien did or like what Beowulf did, which I guess one might argue that Tolkien was copying some of that sort of stuff too. Like we're all working from our references, but at this point they've been refined and beaten to death a lot, and so we complain about these tropes. And so Tolkien, I'm not saying he was doing this for the first time ever, but it was easier to forgive back then than it is now.
And he did it well, though. That's also
And that was this other thing. He did it well, but he did this dialogue, and I asked myself while I was listening, which I really shouldn't do because I'm a poor multitasker, but I said, why is this okay? Why am I willing to forgive this of Tolkien, but I'm not willing to forgive it of other writers? And I realized that the reason is because it's pulling like triple duty. This dialogue is not just telling me what I need to know about the main character. It was also telling me about pieces of the world. It was telling me about dwarvish craftsmanship, and it was telling me about faraway places in the world that I don't think that I'll ever visit in this story. It was telling me a lot about the way that hobbits are, the way that they talk, the dialogue, the way that they banter and they back and forth, and sort of the rambling pub storytelling that you'd get from these characters, right? That was all so good and so well done and so compelling that I didn't care that I was listening to necessary information because the presentation of that information was so charming and so interesting in its many other facets. I was interested in learning Frodo Baggins' family history, even though it has nothing to do with the plot, which is to say that the tangent has nothing to do with the plot, in quotes. It has to do with justifying his presence and justifying the plot, right? It was so well presented that it wasn't a problem. Like the small element of it that one might criticize was insignificant because all of this other stuff was so good. And that's really how you can get away with breaking rules, right? This is the thing. We say we need to follow the rules until we know them well enough to where we can break them. And here's a great example that you absolutely should not do. But for example, and I'm sure every single person who has a driver's license knows what I'm talking about. I'm going to talk about breaking the law a little bit, is that when you are a student driver, you must stop at every single stop sign completely, full stop, and you will wait 3 seconds looking both ways. You will look left, right, left, unless you're in the UK or something. But you want to observe that rule as written. And once you have observed that rule as written enough times to where you can ask yourself, why am I doing this? Then you have asked the question, you have considered the answer, and now you should know enough about driving with your experience and you're having had that conversation with yourself to know when you can reasonably get away with doing a rolling stop or not blowing a stop sign. Don't do that. At least slow down. But like, you'll know the difference between, okay, this is a blind turn. I can't get away with this. Here, I do need to stop. I do need to be careful. Versus
You're the bastion of safety.
wide open space. Nothing's gonna happen. I could blow through this. I won't. I'll slow down. But I could blow through this and nothing could conceivably happen as long as I was not asleep at the switch. And that's kind of how it goes with writing as well. And absolutely shouldn't go with driving. I'm not condoning breaking the law, but I'm admitting to it a little bit. And so
It's an example. It's a
it's
it's
a very human real life example. Like every person does it. Even the police do it. Like the police arguably do it more. But yeah, I think with writing, it's very much like that. You need to learn the rules. You must learn what makes a sentence a sentence. You must write with complete sentences and understand them inside and out. contrary to the arguments of many of my compatriots who argue that grammar is pointless for good writing, I don't think it's pointless. I think it's supplementary. It's not the primary thing. It is, however, very important for editing.
The grammar isn't important for, a character speaking.
Yeah, I
But-
would argue that understanding English grammar, understanding sentence composition is important so that you understand when you are breaking it and why you are breaking it. Because if you mean to create fragmented sentences, there are some things that does, right? When you use a lot of fragments, when you use a lot of stilted speech, things become more conversational. Things become more urgent oftentimes when you use very short fragmented sentences. When you use run-on sentences, things don't make sense. If you read them as they are put out for you, run-on sentences literally do not make human logical sense. So don't do that. Just don't do it. Things like that, right? Punctuation is there to tell you what it is that you're supposed to be getting out of a thing, and anyway, I'm rambling a lot now, but the point is learn the rules and then you can understand better how to break them or when breaking them is worth it, right? So Tolkien is getting his necessary information to the reader in this first conversation of the book, in this first few pages, really. He's getting his necessary information across with what we now consider to be a trope or a cliche, but it's got so many other layers to it, and it's doing so much work, it's pulling so much weight that it's worth it. Because you're getting all of your necessary plot background, you're getting all of this characterization for the world that these people live in, and therefore, this kind of world building that's happening. And you're also really just kind of like getting saturated in the culture of the peace and the harmony of the Shire, right? Which is, I think, what a lot of people talk about with the films. I think this is a really good example of where the films were able to capture this beautifully. There were some things in that first chapter that the film did, like shot for shot. The party and a lot of the sort of the spirit of that was very, very similar. There are some liberties, sure, but the idea was that the Shire and that whole section of the film was to make you feel the peace and the sort of the happiness of home. So that when the characters left and you were taken with them, that you felt ripped away from your home too. It really spent its time making sure that you felt peace in that place and that you felt how painful it must be to let go of that. And so that first conversation, this first chapter in Fellowship of the Rings was really doing the same thing. You were getting sucked in to the gossip and to the charm of these odd people. And where
creating the context of peace so that you can shatter it.
right. Yep. Now you're getting it. So yeah, you want to create this placid environment and this quirky peace that they have in this very utopian little place. Utopia in kind of like the real sense, not in the modern sense of utopia is always without fail messed up. But the Hobbits' kind of quaint little society where they're all like bickering about one another, trying to steal the Sackville Baggins is trying to rob Frodo of his inheritance, and the fact that, yeah, they probably have some right to be a little bit grumbly about the fact that this guy went off, obviously died, and then showed up wealthy as can be after they'd kind of like moved in and settled into his stuff that he left behind. He comes back, and then he has the unmitigated gall to live for like another half a century and not even age. And it's like, yeah, these guys are characterized as assholes, but it's like, I mean, I kind of get it. Like that would be really frustrating. But then also they're really awful people. This is just this social of this little suburban or like country living kind of a thing that's going on. And you get really sucked into it to the point where you're like, those Sackville Baggins, I swear to God. They're trying to steal stuff out of the hall after Bilbo leaves all of this stuff to Frodo, and he's trying to distribute all of these gifts to everyone. And then they show up and they're like trying to steal stuff. And it's like, oh man, these people, wow, they really suck. And I realize that like I'm getting pulled into this kind of like mundane life. In chapter 1, by the way, I mean, it's an hour and a half read aloud, but it's like, is this chapter 1? And I'm already here for it. And to be fair, this is in no small part due to Andy Serkis's excellent reading of the story. I remember when I read it when I was younger and really, really tripping over the dialogue, particularly because I did not understand how these people talk, with all the asides that they do. Like, that's really it, is these sort of parenthetical asides they have in their speech pattern, which is not something that I was familiar with. And that has a lot to do with the fact that in American English, people don't talk like that very often. I wish I could just pick up the book and give you a passage. If you listen to it, you'll know exactly what I mean. Just these little tangents in the middle of sentences that they'll go off on. And if you're from the country,
I had to actually look up the story because I couldn't remember the name, but Desperate Housewives is what the description you were giving me of, was it the Hobbits kind of a thing. It's this very secluded, cut off
yeah,
group of
it's
people
very
where the
interesting.
trauma is amped up artificially.
Right.
And nobody's great.
Right. It's very much a case of these people live such a peaceful life that they have to create their own problems. And it's so calming in a way to listen to this because we live in a world where the problems are very real, for one thing. But I think we've all been there, especially as a kid in high school, right? We understand this very much of like high school kids. Well, ones that live in peaceful places anyway. Where if you're an adult and you have a kid, or if you're, an adult and you once were a kid and you remember when you were in high school, the non-problems that you used to get so worked up about. And then you reminisce about days when you used to be admittedly miserable because the problems were so nothing. And so this is very much kind of the experience of listening to The Shire and The Hobbits. Is like, man, they have it so good. And they're like freaking out because, oh my God, Bilbo, he was so rude to us at his own birthday party where he was lavishing us with gifts and giving us all this free food. Why is he rambling on? I can't believe that he said that. It's like, they have it so good, man.
Think about how good of a tool that is. So I'm thinking about translating that into creating a story framework for a course. In this perfect example, you are establishing the norm, and there's a process of establishing that norm that puts people who are listening, or the students or the listeners or whatever, in that context, so they know what to expect. Because once you have a norm established, that is what you expect. And then when the norm gets smashed because there's this larger world with larger problems that make those little problems seem so much more insignificant,
Yeah.
then that's that jarring emotion that takes people out of that norm and makes them realize there are these other problems that are much more significant that now we're going to have to deal with, or at least a small group of those people in this case.
I think the storytelling takeaway for me here with listening to just this first chapter of Lord of the Rings was that one of the best ways to communicate how good something is to listen to someone complain about things that don't matter. Is to listen to someone complain about it and sort of the insubstantial gripes. Like, if you have a $200 million, no, I won't use that example. That's a bad example. I was about to use it. I was like, wait a second. No, if you have a yacht, right?
Mhm.
And you're a regular person who doesn't own a yacht, and then you
So
listen
you're gonna go with a submarine.
I was going to say luxury plane, actually.
Okay, anyway, sorry, go circle back. You have a yacht.
No, but if you have a yacht, right? If you board a yacht and you're a normal person who doesn't own a yacht, and then you listen to the owner complain about that yacht, it's going to do the opposite of what they're trying to do. And it's going to illustrate to you how incredible a yacht is. You're not going to have the context of owning a yacht being normalized because you don't own a yacht and it's not every Tuesday for you. So the problems that come with owning a yacht, like, oh, I have to discuss with my butler about maintenance and all of these things. And oh, the steering's a bit wonky on my yacht. That's really what it's like. You're listening to someone complain about a yacht and all it's doing is selling you the yacht. That's the thing. That's what I kind of learned from listening to Tolkien's dialogue here, is that you're listening to a bunch of old foofs complain about their lives, and all it's doing is telling you how amazing it is, how peaceful and quiet and lovely and charming the place is. Because all they can do is gripe about, oh, those people from over there, I don't much trust those fellows over that way, but they're a queer lot. The way that they kind of like soft bicker, they're not really like complaining in an overt way. They're just kind of ribbing a little bit. And so I don't see an issue with it in this case. Like, he breaks a rule, but he does it so artfully that you just don't care. Even if you notice it, you don't care. And I think that that's the thing. Anyone who's looking to write anything, really, if you're going to break rules, you have to be sure that the way in which you are doing it is working for you. So here's an example that I use frequently, actually, and really shouldn't, because it is a rule that I break. I will have a single sentence, but, and I will end a sentence with that. I will even end a paragraph with a single word sentence that is just the word but. Because if you do that, people will understand that not only do you mean that there is more, but that the more part is really significant. So I've written like letters of complaint in a professional capacity a few times. And I hate to say that I've actually gotten rather good at it. And there's a thing that I started to do, which is ending paragraphs with colons, which isn't breaking a rule. It's just it's a convention that we don't really do much anymore. But if you end a sentence or end a paragraph with a colon, it really sets up the next paragraph to be extremely important and significant. So if your eyes pass over that, uh-oh, here we go. And then doing the same thing, but without a colon, what you do is if you're writing a letter to complain about something or someone, what you do is you glaze the hell out of it, as the kids say, and then you have your end of sentence, and then you have a single word sentence, but, period, end paragraph. And then you say what's really wrong here. I've done that a couple of times, and it works really well. The point gets across. It is very much against the rule. You don't see that often, and that's why it works. If people start doing it, it won't be good anymore. But the only reason that I would ever do that is because I understand the ways in which it breaks the rules. Not that I understand that it breaks the rules, because of course it breaks the rules. Anybody can tell you that. But why it breaks the rules and why it's dumb and bad are why it's absolutely fantastic. Because as soon as you see that, you're going to think, what the heck is that? And that's the point. Is that
So it's an eye. It's
Yeah.
meant to grab that attention.
it's a
So
way of jumping out. And that obviously isn't what you're trying to do a lot of the time when you're telling a story, but when you're writing a complaint, that's absolutely what you're trying to do. And so when you are writing anything, understanding the ways in which you can break or twist or bend rules is one of the most powerful tools in the box. So
So then there's a difference in what you're talking about, in that there are the basic rules of storytelling, and then there's I guess this would almost be separate. This is the rules of psychology and how to manipulate people into acting or thinking a certain way, and you can do that by breaking those rules of storytelling in specific ways.
yes, there's a thing in speech writing, or rather in oration, giving speeches, that they would tell you to do a lot of the time. And I want to say it's a clap, essentially. And this is not literal per se. Sometimes it's people will tap the microphone or blow into the microphone to create a feedback, or they will slam their hand on the podium, or they will stomp or something at the beginning of their speech. Because what that does is that jarring pulse of sound shocks everyone, and it tells everyone's brain that that was jarring, that was frightening. It gets a visceral response from everyone's nervous system because it was an overstimulation. And so what happens is everybody's brain kicks into overdrive subconsciously and starts to log the information that follows. So basically, it's manipulating everyone's lizard brains into remembering what you're about to say because you scared them. That's what it is. And you can do similar things with writing sometimes. I wouldn't recommend this for all writing because a lot of writing is meant to be immersive in a way, but there's a really good example in The House of Leaves, which is where you have these very tense scenes that are like chase scenes. And the author placed one word per page. So you have
Oh,
to turn a
no.
page between every word in the sentence
Oh,
for a short
no.
bit. And it creates this urgency, it creates this foreboding. That whole book is like this. Not that it's one word per page for the whole book, but the shape of the words in various symbols and things, it forces you to consider them in certain ways. The footnotes are between the panes of windows in the shape of the way that the text is laid out. Like you have the text of the story is like the panes of a window, and then you have through
Oh,
that window, you have footnote information that'll pull you to another page that will throw you down this rabbit hole. And the whole thing is about jumping through rabbit holes and losing your own mind, really. Like that's what that book is. It's losing your mind.
that's
I had to
really
stop
clever,
reading
though.
it because it was so, if you're the type of person who gets immersed and wants to get to the bottom of a mystery, that book will ruin your life. Don't read it. But it's an incredible artistic achievement in terms of what you're able to get away with, like what you're able to communicate to a person through typography and formatting. And so, yeah, similarly, think about the difference between using very large text on a page versus using very small text on a page. You can communicate a bunch of different things. There's a different feel to reading large words versus reading very small words.
It's
Uh,
kind of like, in chat when somebody is talking in all caps versus when they're capitalizing normally.
Right. It can be that, or it can be if this is very large, very clean print, it's like, this is for old people who can't see. Or if it's in very small print, it's like, they don't want you to know this. Or if it's in Comic Sans, it's made by someone who doesn't know anything about typography, you know. And if it's in, sorry, Comic Sans is a fine font, just never use it.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
so I guess the real question is, like, that we've kind of established that there are definite ways and strategies of breaking the rules.
you
But if somebody like, say, for our example, where we're trying to build this world where these students are coming in on the summer bridge into this situation where there is a zombie apocalypse, and we want to establish this story and put them in there and either make that story the norm, or like in your case that you mentioned earlier, establish a different norm and then see that it is now broken by this situation. So we were working on some different scripts, and I think the day one script is one where we were really struggling with how do we establish the whole premise of this event.
And I think that, in my estimation, this comes down to a psychology thing more than it comes down to a writing thing, because you can write whatever serves the psychological purpose. What I think that the psychological purpose is in this case is you're talking about college students who are uncomfortable because they don't all know each other. They're not all friends. They're not comfortable committing to a piece of immersive content around people that they don't know, most likely. If you put a bunch of strangers around a D&D table, they're probably going to have more of a murder hobo ironic fun time than they are going to weep over the death of beloved characters and experiment with intercharacter romances and things like that, unless they're really weird and creepy. Like most of the time you're not going to have that with strangers, but if you're really good friends and you are understanding that this is kind of an improv combined with a collaborative storytelling, and you're willing to really like experiment with, you want to tell these stories and how you want to like get immersed into the world that one of your friends has created for you, there's a very different vibe at a table like that. And so because of the fact that this is a group of new, uncomfortable, scared animals, scared teenagers, essentially, I think that the best thing to do is to create something that they can all sit back and make fun of together. And that, what they won't realize is that they're falling into our plan. Is that,
You fall into a trap. I've played my trap card. Is that what?
yes, if we can create something that is so not bad, but goofy, so stupid that they can all laugh at and poke fun at together. I don't care. I'm perfectly comfortable with them bonding at the expense of my art because the art was their experience, not the thing itself. Because our job here is not to create a masterpiece that they will all fall in love with and be reviewing and giving 5 stars for the next several generations. That's not the point at all. The point is that they're going to go through something together. There are 2 ways that you could do this. You could be fully immersive, and you could scare the living heck out of these kids. You could give them such a memorable experience of zombie nightmare that they can't help but be trauma bonded with their friends. And that's illegal, so we won't do that. Or you you can
You're giving me ideas already. I'm already thinking of
Jesus.
hiring some theater kids to get dressed. No, to get dressed up as zombies and then go into the dorms at night and
Well, okay, so here's an
down
example.
the hallway.
Here's a great example is like Fright Night, like Halloween in college. I went to like a haunted woods thing in college once, and I'll never forget this. We walked down this path, and there were all of these people that I knew who were all dressed up in zombie makeup, like grabbing people's ankles. And there were 2 kinds of people. There were people who were really into it, who were screaming at all the right times and jumping at everything. And those people, I couldn't help but think those people were having a wonderful night because they were experiencing something together. It doesn't matter that it was abject horror. They were experiencing something together, and they will remember it together, and they will be closer with their friends for it. But I remember being there with my friend, and I just sort of floated through the whole thing because I understood the outward premise, and I'm not really into horror myself. And so getting into it would have been more than I would have liked to have handled. But I remember flashing headlights and a revving chainsaw and like 12 guys with sledgehammers and stuff running out of the woods at us. And I just stood there and looked at them completely nonplussed. And at the end of it, one of them just was like, "You're supposed to run away." And so our whole group was like, "What?" They were like, That's how you get out of the woods. It's over there." And I was like, oh, we were supposed to actually be scared and run away. Oh, okay. I was like, hey, man, what's up? Like, I just didn't react to it. And I can't help but think I didn't have a good time there. But I realize everyone else in that group also had that same reaction. And that's what mattered. It's that we all had the same experience together. Or most of us had the same experience together. Some of them, they were freaked out at times when they were kind of in their little group. But my little group had the same reaction. And so we had the same experience. And so we took that with us, you know? And so when we create something for these kids at Summer Bridge, our goal is not to create something amazing that, will single tear from their eye at the astounding work of art that we've created, but rather that we can create something that they can laugh at or poke fun at together so that they won't feel quite so alone. Because that's the worst thing that can happen when you first go to college is to be in isolated. I know
Well,
this
in
from
my eyes,
experience. It's terrible.
in my eyes, it's the same thing either way. The whole point is to have them have a wonderful experience, and it doesn't matter if it's this beautiful work of art or this absolutely silliness that we're trying to create, as long as the end result is what we are trying to get, then I see that as an absolute win.
Right. Yeah, and a complete unqualified success, Like, we don't need incredible art or really much of anything to get them to bond over how bad it is, even, because the goal is their experience, it's not the thing itself. And I think I've probably hammered that point to death enough. And that's really the approach. So when we're coming up with these skits or whatever it is that we're trying to put together, I might be inclined to want to like create something that's got a high production value and really pour my heart and soul into it. But in the end, ironic and cringe is probably better for the purposes that we really do care about. So yeah, that should make things generally easier. And if you're a teacher, you're trying to create a campaign or something, and you'll have the same problem that any dungeon master playing D&D will have, or Pathfinder, or any of the other tabletop RPGs. And that is sometimes you'll create something, and then all of your table will arrive, and that isn't the game that they want to play. They're just there to eat chips and drink beer and have a fun time being murder hobos. And that's when you encounter the real question, which is, it is not about making your friends play the game that you want to write, but it's about writing and DMing the game that your friends want to play. And so that's the real challenge here, is figuring out, what are people comfortable with? What do people like? And how can we lean into that?
Yeah, and it's about tricking them into liking something that they normally maybe wouldn't like. So, for example, I follow this one teacher on Instagram, and he created an Oregon Trail D&D campaign uh, for his history class. So the students would be able to play any number of these different characters, and it would be a storytelling of the Oregon Trail and everything that was involved in it, and it would get the children interested in the story behind it and go out and research the details of all the different historical, like the technology at the time, the people who were involved, and all these other things in order to be more successful at the campaign. And he even made it downloadable and free, not freely available, but it's like a pay your teacher or something like that for the content. And I thought that was genius because it was kids that were generally bored to tears by the historical content. But once you put them in the setting, once you make it fun and silly and a playable game for them, then that really made them want to engage more.
Right. So here's a really unhinged example that I just cooked up in my brain. So I'm gonna go a little off script here. Imagine you're a game developer and your whole thing is you make dating sims. Okay, dating sims genre game. It's basically choice trees that are sort of like working on your reputation with different characters throughout the course of the plot or the story to hopefully land the love of your life with whichever one of the characters you think is hot or whatever, right? And from my understanding, this is a predominantly female-dominated video game genre. And so imagine you have a room full of boys and you got to make them like a dating sim.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Oh no.
There are a couple of ways you
No.
can do this, and one of them is, well, you could go for the obvious choice, which is make a dating sim with a bunch of really hot girls. But the problem is that very quickly degenerates into two groups of people. One group that is way too uncomfortable engaging with that around other people, and another group that is way too comfortable engaging with that as a group around other people. And it becomes kind of like, how can we break this? But there's another answer. And I posit to you JoJo's Bizarre Adventure themed anime dating sim. All the guys sitting around, living their best life, figuring out how to date the most flamboyantly dressed man. I'm pretty sure most dudes would be like, hell yeah. Because it's absurd. And that works for guys a lot of the time for stuff like that.
That's
Because
true.
am I gonna be uncomfortable about that? No. That's awesome, dude. That's the dumbest thing ever, and I love it. Could you get me to unironically engage with it? Probably not, but you could get me to engage with it. I feel like there's a lot of guys who would. I'm sure that there are some who won't, but I think that you'll have the same number of people who won't play ball with anything. But if you're going to try and get a group full of dudes to engage with a dating sim, something like that is probably the best way you could do it. Or here's another example is Crusades dating sim or something like that. I don't know. Actually, no, I don't think that would work either because it would be too unironically hot.
Well, hold on. Isn't there like a space game? And I can't remember the name of it, but it's where you can make choices to like go after romantically, literally any other character
Oh,
storyline.
I can only think of the name of the Commander Shepard, but
Yeah. That's the one.
Dragon Age and the BioWare games, Mass Effect. Yeah, it's
Mass Effect. Thank
Mass
you.
Effect
Yeah,
and
that's
Dragon
what I'm
Age,
thinking of.
like back when they were good. The point though is, yeah, both of those games had dating sims in them. Baldur's Gate, I think Baldur's Gate 3, an unhealthy number of people consider that to be like a dating sim first and everything else after. And that's great because let's be real, people are starved for this. You could absolutely get any group full of guys to play a dating sim if you made it into Baldur's Gate 3 because the game is awesome in every way. And then you just get immersed into it and you fall in love with Jennifer English, of course. So I think Answers like that, though, that's where you have to go above and beyond. And the thing about something like that, right, where you get people to unironically engage with a dating sim, is that you still run into the problem of people who either won't want to engage with it around other people because that's something that they keep to themselves. That vulnerability is something that they keep to themselves, or they will be way too enthusiastic about engaging with it in a group to the point where they really won't take it seriously at all, and it'll become kind of making fun of it, and then they'll just kind of get bored of it. They'll kind of wear it out, right? And
Well, the challenge is now that well, we're having to try and figure out how to really make these kind of things that are can appeal to all kinds of demographics. And it's easy to figure out a type of game that'll appeal just to women, and another type of game that'll appeal just to men. But it's
yeah, and getting something that
extremely
will appeal
hard.
to everyone is tough. I think there's a really good example, actually. So I played a dating sim once, the only one that I've ever played, at the behest of a friend of mine called Doki Doki Literature Club. And it's a horror game, but you don't know it when you start playing it. And the fact that you don't know it when you start playing it, I think will mean that there are a lot of people who won't ever get to experience how good it is because they'll see the front and they'll be like, whatever. But that's a decent example of a game that I think would actually appeal to men and women really well, even though it looks like on the cover it would only appeal to women because it's a romance simulator, but it becomes this eldritch thing that's really terrifying. And it's like definitely a content warning in terms of just horror and suicide and stuff like that. But that game is terrifying.
I've actually got a fantastic counterexample to that is just recent. So Chris Kane is the head of the gaming branch over in computer science at the Catalyst building at EWU, and every semester he has his students create games, right? So he
Like
had
kind
the
of like a mini game jam thing.
yeah, but they have to make functional games that can be sold or people will go in and actually be able to play them. And so he had these master students demo this game to me, and it would floor you. So just like this one you mentioned, it starts out and it's a very happy nature environment, and you're going to this farm, and there's all these cute little bunnies on this farm, and you talk to
God.
the owner of the farm, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I just go around and find these carrots to feed the bunnies with." And so you go around and you find the carrots and you feed the bunnies, and it's all nice and everything. And then at the end of the paragraph, there's a but. So the next day comes along, and you go and find the owner, and they've been torn to shreds, and that they're just barely alive, and they tell you, "Run."
Holy hand grenade!
It literally is. So now you have to, if you find carrots, you can delay it, but like all these bunnies' eyes start going red.
Oh god.
And
Wow, this really is a bunch of people have seen this. Okay.
yeah, but they start glowing red, and you have to start running to get away. But there's progressively more bunnies the longer you run. And so, like, by the end of it, there's a way, I guess, you can win, but you're trying to get away from these murder bunnies. And it starts off all happy and fun and nice and everything, and then it just gets really dark. And it's so hilarious. And they made it hilarious on purpose like that. And I
Yeah.
think it was something that would really appeal to lots of different people.
Absolutely. I think another really good example, and this is an unironic example, this does not employ comedy really at all, is a game a friend of mine recommended to me because he said that the narrator sounds like me. And he was right. I played this game a few times with him, and this was myself and two other guys sat down and we played this game called Slay the Princess. And it's a choice safe game where I won't spoil too much of it in case anyone who's listening decides they want to go and experience this for yourself. I will say, if you're the type of person who gets invested in a game and who can kind of become invested in characters, brace yourself because it is one of the most heartbreaking things that I've experienced. And I won't say much more than that. But the premise of the game is that you are kind of a nameless, faceless character, and your purpose is that you must go through the path and up the hill into the cabin and then into the basement where there is a princess chained to the wall, and you must kill her because if you don't, the world will end. And you can argue with the narrator, and he will explain to you why you must do this. And you must do this over and over again.
Oh no. Oh no.
Try as you might to resist, you must do this over and over and over again. And it is so hard. It's so hard. The voicing is incredible. The writing is second to none. I cannot recommend this game enough, but with the caveat that you have to be emotionally secure enough to handle it because it is brutal. And I can't think of anyone. I don't think that there's a group of people out there beyond those who maybe are just not in a good emotional state to deal with profound sadness. But there's no demographic out there who wouldn't get something from this game, who would say, not for me. No thanks. Like, it's so good. If you're willing to engage with your emotions, this is a good game for you. This game is maybe not going to be up your alley because it'll hit you where it hurts, But that's a very sort of demographic agnostic game in my experience. And it's very choice-based. What you do absolutely matters, even though there's like a very strong arm of fate. Fate can be bent. I think that that's kind of the message of the game. Fate can be bent, not broken.
Yeah, I think that's a good theme for the podcast, is knowing the rules and what can be bent and what can be broken, what can't be broken, and under what context. And I know it's maybe a meandering way to get to that, but I think
We got there in the end.
I think we did get there in the end. So as far as this recording is going, I definitely want to thank you because this has helped me get some more content for another week when everybody is out of the school. So I appreciate that. And we can resume our work in the shadows for the students coming for summer bridge.
Oh,
Thanks, Nigel.
100%. Like, I'm happy to come on here whenever you need to fill in. I'm good.
It might be more often than you expect.
Oh, well, I mean, I do remember when my guidance counselors asked the question. I don't think I actually said this to them, but when I was posed the question, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, man, if I could talk for a living, I would be pretty good at that. Man, what I wouldn't give to be able to just sit around and talk to people all day and have them just pay me to do it.
I know it.
Oh, sounds wonderful.
Well, thank you very much, Nigel, and we'll talk to you in a minute.
Absolutely. All right.
Right. Bye.
Cheers.